Okay, let's go ahead and get started. I see that the clock is roughly around 7:02 right now. So hi, everybody. My name is Ronnie Lau, and I am a federal lobbyist with NEA's government relations team, and I have the honor of leading NEA student debt team work here. And so thanks so much for joining us today for our webinar, Understanding PSLF for Higher Education Faculty and Staff. We're so excited to talk about the PSLF waiver and what this program has in store for you folks in the higher education profession of our membership. And we're really excited just to talk about how we can simply forgive your student debt tonight. Before we start with tonight's programming, I just really want to talk with some introductions first. So I'd love to pitch over to Laura Petty, my colleague.
Hi, everyone. My name is Laura, and I'm a law fellow at NEA's Office of General Counsel, and I also work with Ronnie on the student debt team.
Thank you, Laura. And Lindsey?
Hi, everyone. My name is Lindsey Clark. I'm Director of External Affairs and Chief Borrower Advocate at Savvy. We are a social impact tech startup that's been working with NEA and its members for the last couple of years to help them navigate the complicated process of public service loan forgiveness. So excited to be here, answer your questions, and we'll be showing you a little bit later on how you can utilize our tool to help you with this process.
Awesome. Thanks so much to you both. Okay, why don't we go ahead and get started? So let's talk about some logistics first real quick. So I'm sure many of you have a numerous amount of questions, which is fantastic, and we're more than happy to answer them as much as we can when we get to the live Q&A towards the end of this webinar. We ask that if you can, please hold all your questions as much as you can, all the way until the end. More than likely, we will probably answer your questions through the presentation itself. We cover a lot of material there. So we just want to make sure that folks don't miss what we're covering within the webinar itself. So if you can please hold your questions as best as you can to the end, that would be fantastic. And then two, we also will use the Q&A function on the Zoom function at the bottom to address any question and answers towards the end, opposed to the chat. It's just a much easier way for us at NEA to track our questions. And also at the end, we can log any questions that we may have not gotten to during the webinar, and we'll just kick it over to doing a written format to getting responses to questions that don't get answered live that way. So it's just a much easier way for us to coalesce all the questions together and get to them afterwards also as well. So we'll do that as well. But let's go ahead and get started then. So I would love to start off today just to talk about some success stories, just to paint a picture about what the PSLF waiver is, and you guys could be the very well next ones to receive forgiveness. So the first one is Rob Glover. He is a NEA member from the University of Maine. He's a professor there. And since 2011, Mr. Glover has been a full-time college educator. He's done all the right things to get PSLF, including consolidating his loans, getting into an income-driven repayment plan, and annually certifying his employment each year. Despite all that, his servicer still lost nearly a year's worth of payments. And just because of the Biden administration's PSLF waiver, that helped him forgive all his student debt on December 2021. And that was truly instrumental in terms of that. And he had $150,000 forgiven. There's also another member, Shane Mecklenberger. He is an assistant professor of art from the University of Massachusetts Amherst. He, in 2009, was misled by Sally Mae, who was his original student loan servicer. They had actually originally told him that he was eligible for PSLF, despite not having the right type of loan or being in the right type of repayment plan. So when Mr. Mecklenberger applied for PSLF, he was denied, and he had no idea he was doing all the wrong steps up until that point. But because of the PSLF waiver in April of this year, Mr. Mecklenberger also received the news that all his loans were forgiven thanks to it. And he had $70,000 forgiven. So I just want to paint the picture that this is very real. This is happening to our NEA members, specifically those in the higher education profession. And it could be you guys next, and we will teach you and demonstrate about what next steps you have to take to fully take advantage of this waiver. So I will pass it on over to Laura Petty, who will talk to you guys about what exactly PSLF is and how we arrived to this point. Laura.
Thanks, Ronnie. Hey, everyone. So we're going to start with the basics. Basically, PSLF is actually a federal law passed by Congress in 2007. And the requirements in the law boil down to something that's pretty straightforward, which is that in order to get all of your federal loans forgiven, you need to work for public service. You need to work in public service for 10 years, and you need to make 120 payments. That's one payment every month for those 10 years. And then your loan, all of your debt is forgiven. And it really is that simple under the Biden waiver. And that means that, what I mean by that is that it doesn't matter how much debt you have. It doesn't matter what kind of degree you have. Doesn't matter if you even didn't graduate. If you work in public service for 10 years and make those 120 payments, now under the Biden waiver, you should be eligible for PSLF. Okay, Ronnie, can you go to the next slide? So I'm going to fill you in on a few other details that are important to know, and particularly for folks working at higher education institutions. So in order to qualify for PSLF, you need to work for the right employer and you need to work full time. Notice that I say employer because the PSLF program is not concerned what your job title is. So you can have any job title, it doesn't matter as long as you work for the right employer. The right employer is any 501c3 nonprofit and any government at any level. So for folks working in higher education, that means the vast majority of you. Anyone working at a nonprofit college or university, and anyone working at a public college or university. The only folks who are excluded are employees at for-profit universities. And then the other part of this is you have to be employed full-time. And the PSLF program defines full-time as 30 hours or more per week. And we're going to answer a question about what that can look like for adjunct and contingency faculty later on in the program. Thanks, Ronnie. We can go to the next slide. Okay. So the requirements of PSLF that I just described to you are pretty simple and straightforward. And they're pretty simple and straightforward. Sorry about that. They're pretty simple and straightforward right now, only during the Biden administration's limited waiver, which ends on October 31st. So before the limited waiver, in the beginnings of when the PSLF program, when the first people became eligible for the PSLF program in 2017, which was of course 10 years after the law was passed in 2007, the vast majority of applicants were denied. And that's because there were a whole bunch of regulations and red tape rules. And frankly, the Trump administration's Department of Education just really didn't want to be accepting these applications. So the Biden administration did this giant overhaul where they temporarily got rid of a lot of these extra rules that were preventing folks from getting forgiveness. But that overhaul is temporary and it ends on October 31st. So we're coming up on the deadline and we're going to talk more about that in just a moment. Thanks, Ronnie. Okay. All right. So now we're getting into what this means for you if you have federal student loans and you work full-time for a qualifying employer. So what that means, if you meet all of those qualifications, is that you need to make sure that you submit a PSLF application form before October 31st. Even if you haven't worked for 10 years yet, if you haven't made 120 payments yet, you should still submit the PSLF application form before October 31st. And that's also goes for if you were denied PSLF in the past, because remember, the rules have changed. Okay, and consider this slide to be your checklist. We're going to come revisit this again at the end of the webinar, just to make sure that everyone knows what their next steps are. But what this means for you, if you want to get PSLF one day, or you think you qualify for PSLF right now, is you need to follow these steps that you see on the screen. The first thing you need to do is you need to log into your FSA account at mystudentaid.gov, and you need to figure out what kind of loans you have. And you'll see the instructions right here for how to do that. Okay. If you have all direct loans, then you need to make sure that you submit a PSLF application form before October 31st. If you have loans that say FEL or Perkins on them, FFEL or Perkins Loans, then you have an extra step that you need to do in addition to submitting your application form. And this is super important because especially for folks who have FEL and Perkins loans, these special rules during the Biden administration really benefit you. And you can, you're going to really miss out on PSLF forgiveness if you don't take these steps before October 31st. And so the steps for people who have FEL or Perkins loans is that you first need to, both consolidate your loans, and then you also need to submit the PSLF application form like everyone else before October 31st, okay? The way that you complete your PSLF application form is by going to studentaid.gov, that's the federal government, that's the federal student aid's website, /PSLF. And it's going to take you through something called the PSLF help tool. And that help tool asks you a series of questions. And then when you've completed the tool, it's going to generate a filled out form for you. The tool will fill out the form for you. And all you need to do is take that form and get it signed by someone, usually in your HR office for your employer. And then you need to submit the form. And all of this needs to happen by October 31st. Okay, next slide, Ronnie.
Thanks, Laura. And a quick question before we move on. I'm hoping you can answer this for some of the folks. Why is it that folks that have FEL loans or Perkins loans need to consolidate? Could you go into that a little bit more detail for some folks?
Yeah, absolutely. So the federal government doesn't own FEL or Perkins loans. The federal government only owns what are called direct loans, which means it's a loan taken out directly from the federal government. And so if you have, so that means that because the federal government doesn't own those loans, the federal government can't forgive them. And so that's why if you have a FEL or a Perkins loans, you need to go through this process called consolidation, where basically you convert your FEL or Perkins loans, which are not held by the federal government, you convert them into what's called a direct consolidation loan. And that direct consolidation loan, because you hear the word direct in front of it, it's a direct loan. It's a direct loan from the federal government. And then the federal government has the authority to wipe away that debt. Yep.
Thanks, Laura. And then also would love to mention that NEA members can also use our Savvy tool or Student Debt Navigator by going to that webpage at the very bottom, neamb.com/savvy, which is also a free service that we do for NEA members, which Lindsey will go into later on. But this is also another way to apply for public service loan forgiveness in case you do have issues with using the PSLF help tool or need support in any other way in seeing whether you qualify for PSLF. Okay.
Thanks, Ronnie. And yeah, and I see some really good questions coming up in the Q&A already. We're going to get to those questions live at the end of the webinar, just like Ronnie said. But first, what we're going to do is we're going to do a quick round where I'm going to fire off some frequently asked questions at Ronnie, which I see a few of them have been asked in the chat already. So hopefully we'll get to some of y'all's questions. So my first question for you, Ronnie, is what if I know I haven't worked for 10 years yet, but I want to get PSLF one day? Should I submit the form before October 31st?
So the simple answer for this is yes, you should. Submitting a PSLF application and filling out that ECF form that we mentioned earlier, using the help tool or the Savvy tool ensures that you have benefits to the Biden limited waiver and that all those benefits apply to you. It never hurts to submit an application. So if you intend to get PSLF one day, just do it, especially before October 31st. So I'll give you a pretty straightforward example, actually. So say I've worked in public service for 6 years and say I am not there yet to hit those 120 payments or those 10 years of service. But despite that, I have a FEL loan and I have been making payments on those FEL loans. Under the previous rules of the PSLF program before the Biden administration enacted this waiver, I wouldn't be getting credit for any of those payments that I made or those years of service because I was making payments to a FFELP loan. So that's why it's so essential for you guys to apply right now and consolidate your loans if you have been off track at any point. The waiver is essentially providing previous credit and helping resolve major solutions of misinformation that folks have been getting that they thought they were on track previously. Shane Mecklenberger, who I mentioned earlier, was a fine example of this, where he thought he was on track on these number of years. And when he got to the point at 10 years, he wasn't, but the waiver helped alleviate that. So that's why even if you haven't made those payments and reached that threshold or reached 10 years of service, it's so essential to apply anyways and making sure you do so before October 31st. And I know Laura just mentioned this earlier, but just to reiterate, you can submit an application for PSLF by just using the PSLF help tool on the studentaid.gov website, or you can visit NEA Student Debt Navigator by going to that page and using that tool to help fill it out. And then again, as Laura mentioned, filling out the form and verifying your employment is one thing, but you do need to get a signature from your employer just to verify that, usually again, someone from your HR department. And once you have all that done, you can upload that document to Mohila if they are already your servicer. Mohila is the one student loan servicer right now that is handling all PSLF requests. And so that's why it needs to be submitted to Mohila. Now, if you don't have Mohila and they're not your servicer for your student loans, you must mail or fax the form to Mohila according to the directions of Section 7 of the PSLF form. And you'll see that it's all pretty laid out pretty clearly in the form itself. And the Department of Education highly recommends that you use certified mail if you decide to mail it in, opposed to faxing it, just because that really ensures that it makes it in time. And of course, it's postmarked before that date of October 31st.
Thank you, Ronnie. And just real quick, just to clarify something, because I know it can get a little confusing. We've used the term PSLF form, we've used the term PSLF application form, and ECF form. All of those are the same thing. It's one form that has gotten called a few different things, but there's one form that you need for the PSLF program. And it's 7 pages long, but there's only 2 pages that need to be filled out. Oh, that's right. I need to ask you the next question, Ronnie. All right. So this question I've seen popping up in the chat a lot already. And I think it's really important for this audience for this webinar. So Ronnie, what about adjunct and contingent faculty who work at colleges and universities who don't teach for 30 hours a week, but effectively are spending working more than 30 hours a week for their teaching jobs?
So it's an excellent question, and we get this question all the time. Simply put, if you work on an average of 30 hours per week, but teach fewer than 30 hours per week, obviously in terms of credit hour calculations and all that, you may be only teaching 12 credit hours a semester, maybe even less than that, but maybe actually working more than that. Still fill out the PSLF application form, and then under Section 3 of the form, indicate that you work full-time and write the number of hours that you work on average and that you work for that current employer. And then, of course, same thing as before, as we mentioned, print out your PSLF application and take it to your HR representative or an administrator at your workplace and ask that person to sign Section 4 of the PSLF application form just to get that verified. We do know that this is an issue amongst a lot of our adjunct and contingent faculty members, especially those who are non-tenure track. We recognize that this has been an issue for folks accessing PSLF in the past. There's also a possibility that if you work at 2 different schools, you can couple the hours together to equate full-time in that calculation of 30 hours per week. So we know that is also another avenue for some folks to go get PSLF. So again, if you feel limited by the full-time term and the 30-hour term, do what you can and work with your employer to see if you can verify yourself as full-time. But there is good news on the horizon, I will mention, is that NEA has been obviously advocating for this amendment a lot because we know that adjunct and contingent faculty is becoming a more and more common situation at universities and colleges. And to help alleviate that, the Department of Education actually proposed some new regulations to help define how to calculate best those hours so that adjunct and contingent faculty have access to PSLF. And essentially how that would be calculated is that per credit hour or contact hour that you have, it will be multiplied by 3.35. And thus you would need roughly around 9 credit hours of teaching to be considered full-time for that new calculation. And they borrowed that from the states of California and Oregon because those states had passed different state laws to help calculate that amongst their public universities. And they're looking to set that federal standard for every single adjunct and contingent faculty member across the nation. And that's something that we're really excited for, but hasn't been implemented yet. We hope that gets implemented next year. But in the event of that, until we wait for that moment, right now, the directions that we have on this slide is what you will need to do to access PSLF.
Yeah, and just to add, there's no there's no risk or harm to you for truthfully marking that you work full time when you do in fact spend 30 hours or more. If you do in fact spend 30 hours or more working at your job, so just to let you know that. Yeah.
And the technicality of that too, just to add, is that the verification of you working full-time is that signature from somebody at your workplace, whether that is that HR representative or that administrator. It also very well could be one of your supervisors. As long as they have legally access to your employment information, they can sign that form to verify it in Section 4. And that's really what all it takes to be considered as full-time.
Yep. Yep. Okay, so we see some questions already coming up about this in the Q&A, Ronnie. How do folks find out whether they need to consolidate their loans?
Yep, excellent question. So we know that this is the case for many of our NEA members. So this one's a little bit longer. And again, the webinar is being recorded. So if you miss any information here, you can always go back to the recording and we will be sure to send that out to everybody after the webinar concludes. But with the FSA ID that we had mentioned earlier, do the same thing, log on to studentaid.gov, and you'll go to your aid summary. And once you go to your aid summary, you can go down to the loan breakdown section, and there it will have a list of each federal student loan that you have taken out. And then you can expand those loans by clicking View Loans and then View Loan Details, which is a small arrow next to the loan. And then it will provide you the specific loan type. So we bounced around 3 words earlier. As Laura mentioned, direct loans are the federal direct loans that are directly provided and held by the federal government, hence direct loans. And those are the loans that are qualified under PSLF that don't need consolidation. Those are qualified for forgiveness, simple as that. Now you have a federal family education loan, otherwise known as a FFEL loan. Those are indicated by FFEL under your loan breakdown section. And if you have any of your loans that say FFEL, those loans need to be consolidated. And then there's also Perkins Loans. And Perkins Loans, simply put, also has the word Perkins next to its name. And you have any Perkins loans, you need to consolidate those as well. And consolidation essentially turns them into a direct loan. And like before, and this is a really important note because this is a unique distinguishment for those who may have accidentally consolidated loans or may have been in some way steered to consolidate their loans by their servicer or misled in any way. Before the limited waiver was introduced, if you had consolidated your loans at any point, even if you were doing all the correct things to qualify for PSLF, you may have reset your payment count because of that. And that was something that was a huge issue for a lot of our NEA members and public servants. But during the limited waiver right now, until October 31st, you actually can consolidate your direct loans without losing any PSLF credit, which is essential. There are a lot of folks that may have worked for 10 years of service or made 120 payments that accidentally or maybe told to consolidate their loans and they lost all their credit. And this is the time for them to apply for the waiver because it is crediting back all those payments they may have lost from that accidental consolidation. Also at the same time though, if you do have multiple direct loans, it actually may be beneficial just to consolidate anyways, even though direct loans qualify for forgiveness. And that's because they just may have different payment counts in terms of how soon you'll receive PSLF. Consolidation essentially will give you the highest number of payment counts. Say I have 2 federal direct loans, one I have 90 payments that are qualifying, another 120. If I consolidate those together, that will grant me 120 as my highest payment count. That's how we'll start that. So if you have a situation like that, it may actually be wise to also consolidate all your direct loans just to make sure that all your loans are forgiven at the exact same time.
Yeah, and just as a reminder, that's a really good hack that you should only take advantage of before October 31st. Do not do that after October 31st because that will reset your payment count. Okay, so Ronnie, I want to consolidate my loans. What do I do?
Great question, and we see this all in the chat. You probably see a very unique scenario that we keep telling you guys to do is go to studentaid.gov, which is the Department of Education student loan website, and you will complete something called the direct consolidation loan application. You'll select consolidation for all those types of loans that we mentioned that say Perkins or FEL. You'll select MOHELA as your servicer. As I mentioned earlier, MOHELA is the sole servicer for the Public Service Loan Forgiveness Program, which is why you do that. And then after that, you will select income-driven repayment, which is between 4 plans: Repay, Pay, IBR, or ICR. All 4 of those are different types of income-driven repayment plans. And the reason we say also to use those 4 payment plans, especially for folks who have not reached 120 payments or 10 years of service, while the PSLF waiver is crediting anything that may have not counted previously, we want to make sure you're on track to get PSLF 10 years from now. So if I'm working for 6 years now in public service and I consolidate, I want to make sure that the next 4 years after that, I am paying on an income-driven repayment plan so that I receive PSLF at year 10, 4 years later. Just to be clear, there is no fee in submitting this consolidation application, and you actually do not need to contact your servicer or MOHELA to do this. As I mentioned earlier, all you have to do is just go to studentaid.gov to go do this yourself. After you submit your consolidation application, you may actually receive communications from Aidvantage, which is actually another student loan servicer. They're just the ones that are contracted by the Department of Education to process consolidation applications. But after the consolidation application is fully processed, your account will be assigned to MOHELA. And then finally, another disclaimer that we'd love to share with folks, and we see this from time and time again, is that you may be contacted by private companies that offer to help you consolidate your loans for a fee. And those companies have zero affiliation, again, zero affiliation with the U.S. Department of Education or any of the contracted federal student loan servicers that the department has a partnership with. We get these all the time, and we have NEA members who unfortunately spend money to go consolidate their applications or misled the wrong way by these organizations, especially in times like this where we're approaching deadlines with the PSLF waiver or the payment pause ending. They really take advantage of these situations to catch folks that are most vulnerable who can't navigate this very, very difficult process. And they try to take advantage and take money from you from that situation. So again, you can just do all this stuff by going to studentaid.gov on your own and can do the consolidation application on yourself without contacting your servicer or any of these private companies.
Okay, so Ronnie, I'm still a little nervous about consolidating my loans because I heard that it's going to add interest to the balance on my principal. What happens if the PSLF program goes away before I become eligible?
That's a great question. So we hear this concern also a lot. Rest assured, preserving the Public Service Loan Forgiveness Program is one of NEA's top priorities. I'm sure a lot of these concerns that we hear from folks based on things that they hear on the news, things that they hear from the Republican Party, where there's some folks that are against this program specifically or any debt cancellation efforts in general. But like I said, rest assured, this is a top priority for the NEA to preserve this program. And then while some Republican members of Congress want to revoke public service loan forgiveness, the program still has bipartisan roots and bipartisan support. It was created with bipartisan support back in 2007, and also to this day still has Republican members of Congress that still support this program. And not to mention, we were successful in protecting the program throughout all the Trump administration throughout those 4 years, despite his disdain for the program and the DeVos administration.
Yeah, and the PSLF program is a law. It's not a regulation, so it couldn't be taken away by a president because it's a law.
Correct. So congressional authority would have to go, a new law would have to be passed by Congress to go remove it. But to answer Laura's first part of her question, yes, consolidation actually will convert any outstanding interest to the principal balance of your loan. I know that sounds scary, but if you intend to plan to get PSLF, this will not matter in the end, given that the outstanding balance of your federal student loans will be forgiven at that 10-year mark of service and those 120 payments. And then, of course, we've mentioned this multiple times that any educator who has 10+ years of service and payments on FFEL loans or Perkins loans, consolidation is just the only way for your loans to be converted into a direct loan to be eligible for forgiveness. So if you intend to get PSLF, consolidation is just the only way to go do that if you have a FFEL or Perkins loan. Simple as that. There's no way around it. And then finally, too, if you consolidate also, your increased principal balance will not impact how much you pay. Income-driven repayment between those 4 plans I mentioned earlier is based on household income, not your loan balance. So again, I know this is a big concern for a lot of folks, but rest assured, NEA is working to protect the program. And of course, the program will help alleviate the debt anyways, regardless of that mark when you reach those thresholds.
Okay, Ronnie, do my 10 years of public service have to be consecutive to be eligible for PSLF?
This is a simple answer, and that is no. Contrary to popular belief, your years of service doesn't have to be consecutive. As long as you work full-time for enough qualifying employers for a total of 120 months and make qualifying payments to those 120 months while you're employed by those employers, you can be eligible for PSLF. Say you take a break from education in any way, and you go back to education down the road, that's okay. They'll verify your employment when you apply for PSLF, and that's how they track and couple those hours together.
And Ronnie, this feels like a good time to add this. I don't think we've talked about this yet in today's webinar, but what happens if I've worked for several different qualifying employers over the years? So like, let's say that I worked in a nonprofit for 2 years, then I worked at a public university for a few years, and then I went on and worked at the private university where I'm currently working. Do I need to do anything different for applying for PSLF?
That's an excellent question. And the only different thing that you have to do, say, versus an educator who has worked 10 years at one public university specifically, you will have to submit a PSLF application for each different employer that you've worked with. And that is because you'll have different employment verifications. So we talked about earlier about how you need a wet signature from someone at your current employer or previous employer to verify your employment. So in Laura's situation, the 3 years that they worked at a nonprofit company, they will have to go fill out a different PSLF application for that to verify those 3 years of employment, and then do the same thing with another PSLF application for the years right now at a public university, and so on and so forth. So if you have any situations like that, you will need to fill out multiple forms.
Yep. So you need to submit a PSLF form for each qualifying employer that you've ever worked for. Yep. Thanks, Ronnie.
Awesome. So this is a great segue. Again, as I mentioned, NEA is a tremendous resource to folks around this. Again, folks can get free help by applying for public service loan forgiveness by visiting the NEA Member Benefits webpage, which is right there at the top right with /savvy. And if you're not an NEA member joining us today, we highly encourage you to join our union, and you can join by nea.org/join. And NEA also has a multitude of free resources and FAQs available like this one, previous recordings of webinars. We like to host these webinars monthly to help provide a service to our members navigating this difficult process. And there's a ton of stuff like that, one-pagers and other things that we may have not covered tonight on nea.org's student debt support webpage. It is a great resource to folks, and we highly encourage you to visit it. But just to talk about the Savvy tool a little bit, I do want to point out an example that we have for this of someone who helped benefit from it. Emily Robinson, she is a Georgia high school educator and an NEA member from down there, and she had $21,000 forgiven thanks to the PSLF waiver. Her quote is that she has a master's degree and she couldn't figure PSLF out, and she was getting rejected, and she simply had no idea why. Then a couple of years ago, she saw the Student Debt Navigator run by Savvy in the NEA Today magazine, and she used that to finally figure out what was going on and what was wrong in her process. They helped her enroll in the right repayment plan and making sure that her federal student loans were consolidated, so she qualified, and then she benefited from the waiver down the road because of that. It helped jumpstart her in her progress, making sure she got the 10 years of public service that she got. And so she is a clear benefactor from the Savvy tool. And I will pass it on to Lindsey now, who will talk to you more about what it is and how you guys can all use it. Lindsey.
Great. Thanks, Ronnie. And I worked personally with Emily on helping to get her that forgiveness. We were so excited when it went through, and really excited to be with you all here this evening. Again, my name is Lindsey Clark. I'm Director of External Affairs here at Savvy, and we've had the pleasure of working with the NEA student debt team for the last couple of years in helping their members really navigate this complicated program that is PSLF. So if you can go on to the next slide, Ronnie. I just wanted to take a quick moment to talk about who we are here at Savvy. As Ronnie had mentioned before, there are a lot of scam companies out there, less than reputable actors in this space. So just wanted to sort of take a second to tell you about who we are. We are a social impact technology startup based in Washington, D.C., about a block away from NEA headquarters. And we were founded by policy experts and advocates who had been fighting on behalf of the borrower for nearly a decade. And in 2017, this was the first year that borrowers could start applying for public service loan forgiveness. They saw how many borrowers were rejected. Over 100,000 applied, less than 1% were accepted. And so they decided to do something about it. And so they built a technology platform and a service to help borrowers not only better understand their debt, but actually navigate from start to finish around these complicated programs like public service loan forgiveness. So we help not only with things like forgiveness, PSLF, teacher loan forgiveness as well, but unlocking additional savings on your way to forgiveness through things like income-driven repayment plans for when payments are eventually going to resume. We're a registered public benefit corporation, which means it exists in our mission and charter to serve the public benefit, which is exactly why we do things like this here tonight with the NEA and our multitude of partners across the country to be able to help better educate and inform borrowers. Because if there's one thing I can say as a borrower myself with a little over $200,000 in student loan debt, the better informed you are, the more empowered you are as a consumer. So enough about us. I'll get into the good stuff here on this next slide and just talk to you through a little bit of what this sort of Savvy tool and experience has to offer. And it's completely free for NEA members. So when you go through this process, you're able to see a personalized repayment and forgiveness plan. So it's basically down to the cent as to what you might be eligible for as far as repayment and forgiveness goes. We also monitor for new programs and policy changes. You know, as soon as something is announced, within hours of that announcement becoming official, you'll receive an email in your inbox letting you know what's going on. And then we offer sort of this premium level of service that, again, is free to all NEA members, in which we basically take on all of the administrative burden for you. The paperwork and applications behind public service loan forgiveness, those employment certification forms that Laura was talking to you about. We pre-fill and digitize all of those. If you've got multiple employers, we send those out to your employers for you. We help to capture those signatures and submit them on your behalf. And that way they get there quickly, accurately, efficiently, and you are able to get on your way towards forgiveness. And last but not least, and I think this might be one of the most compelling aspects about the service itself, is the ability to have sort of a dedicated support person who is basically going to be with you every step of the way and helping you through this process, and to be able to receive that personalized support, whether via email or telephone. I know as a borrower myself how frustrating it can be to not feel like you're getting the right information, to just want to call and talk to someone. And that's exactly the kind of service that we provide. So on this next screen, we'll kind of go into a bit more detail, but this sort of premium service that we offer, again, takes on all of that administrative burden for you. And that includes not only the PSLF employment certification forms, but any applications for things like income-driven repayment plans, which again, for those who are going to have to be thinking about starting those payments back up, this is important. So again, we pre-fill and digitize all of that, submit that on your behalf to your servicer. And then I think this is really key. We monitor to ensure it achieves that desired outcome. So many borrowers that we've worked with, especially over the past year, even under this Biden waiver, they've submitted those forms, but haven't heard anything for months at a time. And it causes you to be very anxious, to wonder what's going on. There's really a lack of transparency there between you and the servicers processing these. And so that's really where we come in to help make sure that you've got someone to talk to ask questions along the way, but to make sure that if there are any hiccups, we help you to resolve them. So I'm going to sort of show you in a bit more detail how to get your account started and some of the features and sort of what that experience looks like. Again, to get started, you can go to neamb.com/student debt. You can log into your MB account and you'll have access to the full Savvy suite of resources and tools. Once you've signed in on this next slide, the first thing you'll see is your Savvy dashboard. And this is sort of like mission control for everything Savvy. It's where you're going to be able to do a lot of different things. But probably the most important is on this next slide here, and that is application monitoring. So as I mentioned, there are a lot of touch points along the way between now and getting forgiveness. You know, you're submitting that application, but then you might be waiting a while, not hearing much. And so our application monitoring system is designed to help track each and every one of those steps to let you know what that timeline should be expected to be for you as a borrower. You know, make sure those expectations are set accordingly, and really help you to understand where you are in the process. So all of that is sort of tracked for multiple employment certification forms, or however many you need, through that dashboard. On this next slide, you'll see that you can register for any number of our live and interactive workshops. So sometimes we host these with NEA, but we also host them for our community of borrowers across the country on a weekly and monthly basis. You can see our full lineup of events. Sometimes we do them just on consolidation, sometimes just on Parent Plus loans. So really great stuff, and you can register for those from your dashboard as well. On this next slide, so when you're ready to get started with the Savvy process, it's pretty simple. We're going to ask you a few simple questions, almost like a TurboTax for your student loans, or at least that's the best analogy I can use to describe it. So we're going to ask you a few simple questions around your family size and your tax filing status. On this next slide, you'll see we're going to ask you some questions around your income. Again, this is going to help to formulate not only around forgiveness, but your repayment as well. And then on this next slide, we're going to ask you about your employment history. And this is really important when it comes to gauging your forgiveness eligibility. I highly recommend that you add in any current or previous employment you might have had. This is going to be able to help you and help us determine sort of that with more accuracy, the length of that employment and that eligibility when it comes to programs like public service loan forgiveness. Now, on this next slide, as you're going through the tool, let's say you are one of those borrowers who, because of this waiver, could be at 120 or more qualifying payments. You'll see that. So as you go through, whether it's things like consolidation or whether you've reached the 120, we're going to communicate that to you accordingly. So it's sort of got that smart skip logic. It's completely tailored and designed around the information you're inputting into the tool. Then on this next slide, you'll see sort of the last step here in this process is syncing your loans. So most borrowers have on average between 5 to 6 different student loans, different disbursement rates, dates, I should say, interest rates, et cetera. Very rare if a borrower were to know all of that off the top of their head. So we provide a loan sync using a technology called Plaid. It's sort of a best-in-class syncing technology, highest level of security and privacy. If you have a Venmo account, you've used Plaid before. And what it allows us to do is to essentially sync over a read-only snapshot of your student loan data. So it doesn't give us access or anything like that, but simply a snapshot of things like your balance and your interest. These are things that are going to be important for when we're trying to estimate forgiveness and repayment amounts. So you're able to do that for one servicer, for multiple servicer, however many you might have. That's sort of the last step in this process. And then after that, on this next slide, you'll reach what we call the plan options page. And this is basically where we show you what your potential options are as far as monthly payment, what that total payment looks over time, how long until potential forgiveness, and how much total you'd be eligible to have forgiven. And you can expand below for more details about these programs. We actually show you a couple different options that you might want to pursue. And if at this point you say, this sounds good, I'd like to proceed, you can click continue, and then we begin whipping up all of those applications for you. Again, for not only public service loan forgiveness, but income-driven repayment as well. And last but not least, I wanted to just touch on our customer support team. So this is sort of that personalized support that many borrowers I know are interested in receiving. You're able to initiate that conversation right through your Savvy account. You can send a message to our support team and start that conversation, and then request a phone call if you'd like it to be over phone, and they can begin to help you through that process. We also have a live and interactive help center with tons of great content that you can explore. Again, all of this completely free of charge for NEA members, that is. So again, I think we're coming up here on the last slide. To get started, you can go to neamb.com/student debt. And the team over here at Savvy really looks forward to being able to help as many of you as possible, especially leading up to this October 31st waiver deadline. So I'll turn it back to you, Ronnie. Thank you.
Thank you, Lindsey.
Sorry, back to you, Sarah.
Oh, no, it's all good. It's all good. So we're going to take up the last 14 minutes of this webinar, just answering the great questions we've been getting in the Q&A. And I want to get through as many as we possibly can. So I'm going to go through a few rapid fire ones so that we can get folks' questions answered. First one I'm throwing to, and Lindsey, do you want to participate in the rapid fire, or are you?
Sure, whatever would be helpful.
Okay.
I'm here as backup to Ronnie, but he's your main.
Okay. Got it. Okay. So, well, then I'll throw this one to you, Lindsey. Someone asked, what happens if I haven't been paying during the COVID pause?
So if you haven't been paying during the COVID pause because you've been eligible for the payment pause, that's okay. That's actually great. And you should continue that until payments resume. Because in fact, for each one of these months that payments have been paused, so from March of 2020 through right now will be August 31st. So that's 30 months. If you've been working 30 hours or more for a qualifying employer, you are actually eligible to receive basically free PSLF credits for all 30 of those months. So that's 30 out of the 120 total that you need to achieve forgiveness. So that's putting you about a fifth of the way there. So you didn't need to make payments during this time. For each month of the payment pause, you were able to basically collect a free PSLF credit as if you did make a payment. So that's huge and very significant for a lot of borrowers.
Yes, thank you, Lindsey. So it's really good if you haven't been paying during the payment pause. That's great. Just make sure you get your form in by October 31st. Ronnie, someone asked, does it matter how much money I make?
No, it does not.
No, it doesn't.
Income that does not have anything to do with public service loan forgiveness. You can't be capped out of PSLF. So as long as you apply and you meet the payment amounts and you work for a public service employer, you can qualify for PSLF. Simple as that.
Thank you. Okay, I'm going to answer this one. Someone said my loans say FFELP, not FFEL. What's the difference? Good question. FELP is the same as FEL. If your loans say FELP or if they say FEL, you need to consolidate them. Okay, next question. Someone asked, I have one loan that is direct and one loan that is not. Should I consolidate? I'm going to go ahead and quickly answer. We're all nodding. Yes, yes. You should consolidate. And I have another related question. If I have both already consolidated, I have some loans that are already consolidated and other loans that are not consolidated. Can I consolidate these loans together? And the answer is yes. Yes, you can.
Yes, you can consolidate as many times as you want. So also there's no limit.
Yeah. Okay. So I got another question that says, what company do I consolidate with? Question mark. Nelnet, my loan holder, gave me a list of several. And I'm going to stop you right there and say, no, 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 no. Do not consolidate your loans with a company. You consolidate your loans on the Department of Education FSA website, which is studentaid.gov. Do not go to a private company to consolidate your loans. Someone asked, Ronnie, I'm going to throw this one to you. What if consolidation won't happen before the deadline? We'll start with that.
Well, that's a great question. We know that's a super big concern because we're nearing that deadline. And we know that it takes a while to consolidate. So I saw another question earlier about how long it takes to consolidate your loans. And for that whole process to complete, it could take somewhere between 1 to 2 months. And for some folks that may hear that, they're like, uh-oh, then like, what does that mean with the deadline? You can still apply for public service loan forgiveness while your consolidation application is pending. The biggest thing is that you take your steps first in doing your consolidation application first, then apply for PSLF. But you must do both before October 31st to receive the benefits of the waiver. And so by doing that, it's like essentially like a postmark date. As soon as they have they receive your application and that you've sent it on, then you're fine. You'll receive the full benefits even if you get the answer after that date. But it's essential that you do all this before October 31st and you do your consolidation application first. But you can do your PSLF application while your consolidation is being pending.
Thank you, Ronnie. And we've actually double checked this with our partners at the Department of Education. But this is, It does still make us uneasy. They have assured us that it needs to be postmarked by October 31st, but we would advise you and encourage you very strongly to, if you need to consolidate, do so ASAP, and then also submit your PSLF application form ASAP, just in case, you know, if you have to send your application form in the mail and it gets lost, or you didn't fill out part of your application form correctly. This is why, to be absolutely safe, you should not be waiting until the last second of the deadline. Okay. Someone asked, what if I recently left working in higher ed this June after 15 years of service with 15 years of consecutive payments? Lindsay, can this person qualify?
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the new stipulations with PSLF now is that you no longer actually need to be employed at the time you are submitting your application. You can actually be, you can have left employment or have gone to a private employer. And so you are actually exactly who this waiver was designed to help. So you can retroactively receive credit. And so absolutely you should be submitting that application.
Thank you. Okay, so someone asked, are Parent Plus loans eligible? And it is a little bit more complicated, but I'm going to summarize for you about Parent Plus loans. Parent Plus loans are not direct loans, which means they need to be consolidated in order to be eligible for PSLF. But Parent Plus loans don't get the same benefits that FEL and Perkins loans get under the waiver. So here's what this means for you. If you have Parent Plus loans only, and you do not also have personal loans that were taken out for your own education, then if you want to get those, you can get those loans forgiven one day through the PSLF program, but only if you consolidate, and consolidating will reset your payment count. So basically, if you have only Parent Plus loans out, you would have to consolidate those loans, and you wouldn't get credit for all of the years that you've been working in public service already. You would have to work in public service for 10 years going forward. And then the other thing about consolidated Parent Plus loans is that you're only eligible for one of the income-driven repayment plans, and it's the one that's the least generous. So your monthly payments won't be as low as other income-driven repayment plans. That's if you consolidate your Parent Plus loans only. And so that's why, depending on how much debt you have, how much Parent Plus loans you have, how much longer you plan to be working until you retire, it might not be the best option for you to consolidate your Parent Plus loans only. It's going to depend. If you have Parent Plus loans and you also have your own personal student loans that you took out for your own education, then if you consolidate those loans together into one loan, then you can get the benefits of the waiver. So that's a very critical distinction. And it's another reason why why Savvy can be a really good support tool for you, because it's really, for borrowers with Parent Plus loans, it's going to depend more what the best next steps are for you. Okay. Lindsay and Ronnie, did either of you have anything to add to that? Okay. Someone just said, and I think it's worth reiterating, sorry I joined this Zoom late. Have you discussed whether part-time adjuncts are eligible for PSLF? And I think it's worth just reiterating this. Ronnie, do you want to do it?
Yes. So again, the big consensus around this is that the two big things around PSLF is making 120 payments for your federal student loans and working for a qualified employer for 10 years or more. And there's a 30-hour threshold by working full-time, and that is an issue for a lot of our adjunct faculty members. But the big thing about it is that we know that that calculation is not the best, because we know that you guys are working more time outside of the classroom, and you may be teaching more hours than the number of credit hours that you're providing per semester. So with that said, still indicate that you work full-time within your public service loan forgiveness form, and then seek somebody out to sign your ECF form portion, the section 4 within your public service loan forgiveness application, to verify your employment and say that you work full-time. That is the easiest way for you to do that. And if that is still an issue for you, then if you work at multiple different universities at this point, you can couple those hours together. Some folks may be adjuncts at multiple universities at the same time. You can couple those hours together to meet that 30-hour threshold to be considered full-time for the purposes of PSLF. But also, again, a fix is coming through hopefully the proposed regulations. Down the road, we hope that there's going to be an easier way for us to help navigate this, and we'll be sure to update folks when that happens.
Thank you, Ronnie. And actually, someone else asked, how do adjuncts combine work at multiple schools? And the answer is that you have to submit a PSLF form for each of those schools that you work for. And if on your PSLF forms, you're marking that you work part-time at each, but let's say that you're saying that you work 15 hours a week at one school and 15 hours a week at another, you can check part-time and then write 15 hours a week for on each of those forms. Okay, next question. Someone said, I tried to send the PSLF form to HR at the college I work at, but it was never signed. I've been given the runaround from HR. Should I go to this college and try to track them down? How do I find someone who will sign my PSLF form? Go, you want to take it, Lindsay?
Sure. Yeah, we see this happen all the time. And it's it's one of these sort of administrative hurdles that people have to overcome in order to sign this. I would first try maybe a different contact at that college. If you're still not having any luck, I would say maybe even reaching out to Ronnie, someone on your team that can help perhaps to escalate the situation even a bit, or just come in with a bit more force. I don't know. What do you guys think? But I would definitely try to go get a hold of whoever that contact originally that you had might have been, see if there's a new contact. A lot of times they're changing contacts very quickly at these entities. So it might be someone new who, doesn't have your form in front of them. But that's why our teams are always sort of here to help support you in that process.
Yeah, I would say be persistent, be dogged, and show up in person and try to talk to somebody. And you can assure that person that nobody, the federal government isn't going to come after them and check. There's not going to be like any, post verification process of that signature or audit of any kind. You really just need the signature.
Yeah, there's nothing that says that they have to be a specific individual at your employer. Doesn't say it actually has to be their HR representative. That's just the most common way, because all HR representatives have records of your employment. So that's just the easiest way of how we direct folks. But again, if you have a supervisor, any managing individual that you may work under, those folks can also qualify in signing that.
Great. Okay, Ronnie, somebody asked, if you're already being certified annually by your employer for PSLF, is it necessary to complete the waiver form? First, I just want to clear up, because I read that question. The waiver form, there's no separate form for the waiver. It's all one form. It's the PSLF application form, also sometimes called the ECF or employment certification form. So Ronnie, if someone's been submitting their PSLF form every year for their employer, do they need to, do something different?
No, they don't necessarily need to do something different. The only thing is that if you haven't submitted that certification or application this year, then you should, because you need to do that before October 31st. Again, if you haven't done that before that deadline, you won't receive benefits of the PSLF waiver.
Great. Okay, and someone said, I have a Perkins loan. I haven't made payments for many years. And I haven't come close to 120 payments. Should I, actually, I don't know enough about this person's situation to answer the question. I'm sorry about that. Somebody asked, how do I determine if I'm on an income-based repayment plan?
You go ahead, Ronnie.
I was going to say, I think the Savvy tool is probably the best way, but of course you can always log into your servicer's web portal or also your FSA portal, and that should answer that. But I don't know if you have anything else to add to that.
No, I was going to say that's probably the best way to check, just because, because of the payment pause, it's been 2 years. So, a lot of people have forgotten what they're on. So logging into your servicer portal will probably be the best bet. Yeah.
And if you don't think that you're enrolled in an income-based repayment plan and you want to get ready for when the payment pause ends, it's actually quite a good idea to enroll in an income-based repayment plan now, if you still have years to go before you would qualify for PSLF. And the way you do that is on studentaid.gov. That's the federal government's website. Don't do it through your servicer. There's an application for enrolling in an income-driven repayment plan on studentaid.gov. And again, if you have years to go before you are eligible for PSLF, it's a smart thing to do now in preparation for when the payment pause ends. Okay, I think we're wrapping up on time. Do you want to pull up the recap slide, Ronnie?
Yeah, absolutely. So I want to be respectful for folks' time. This was excellent, and I try to answer as many questions as I could through the Q&A function. Again, rest assured, we'll be going through the logs and answering these questions individually. What we'd like to do at the end is we collate all these questions that you guys put in the Q&A box. Anything that wasn't answered live or answered through me, we will provide written answers, and we'll distribute those out to everybody who registered, not just those who asked the question, just because you may have asked a question that somebody else might be wondering about, and that might be helpful to them along the way. But just to recap before everybody takes off, before October 31st, again, go to studentaid.gov/PSLF and log in with your FSA ID or create one, and make sure your contact information is up to date. That is how the Department of Education is going to contact you, and your servicer is going to contact you about your public service loan forgiveness application process. And that is the way of how they reach you, by what information that you put under your FSA portal. And again, if you have direct loans and have already applied for public service loan forgiveness, hopefully you'll receive forgiveness in the coming weeks. You don't need to do anything different as long as you've submitted the form. You can wait. We understand that there's probably some wait time right now. We know that 1 million applications have been processed in the past 2 years for public service loan forgiveness, and roughly around 600,000 of those came from the waiver within itself. So a lot of folks are trying to take advantage of this, and rest assured, as the department has also ensured, is that if you've submitted an application before the 31st of October, you'll be fine and you'll receive the benefits. Again, the two scenarios, if you have FFEL loans or Perkins loans, you have to consolidate your loans before you apply for public service loan forgiveness. But again, you can do that before your consolidation application is complete, and make sure you submit that application before October 31st. And then also in a situation, if you also have not met 10 years of service or 120 payments, still apply for PSLF. It puts you on the right track and will give you credit to if you weren't making the right type of payment plan beforehand, or if you didn't have the right type of student loans and you didn't consolidate yet. That is still going to be beneficial to you to apply for public service loan forgiveness now under the waiver. And again, you can do this by completing your public service loan forgiveness application by going to the studentaid.gov website using their help tool, or also using the Nea Member Benefits Savvy tool by going to neamb.com/savvy. And again, after you have that all complete, if you are using the help tool, you can submit your application according to the instructions on section 7 of the application form of how you can get that to Mohila, the servicer for it. So thanks so much again, everybody, for joining us this evening. We hope everyone is having a great summertime, and we'll be around to answer any questions afterwards through via email if you guys want to reach out to us. Also, the student debt page website on the NEA webpage also has great ways of how you can contact us if you have anything else. But otherwise, we will send out the recording to the webinar afterwards, and also the follow-up questions. So thanks so much again, and thank you again to Laura and Lindsay. Take care, everybody.